Welcome, everybody. Today we have formerly from Soteria, Alaska, we have Susan Musante, Matt Ladner, and Spencer Ladner. And from Rethinking Psychiatry, we have myself, Cindy Fisher, and Grace Sylvia. Yes. And we had a great discussion on May 23rd when Susan, Matt, and Spencer came to talk about their experiences working at Soteria, Alaska. And we had so many great questions in the chat. We did not have time to get to all of them. So we're going over the extra questions that we weren't able to get to. So thank you, everyone, for being back with us. So I will start with the first question. Which was, this was something that I think you touched on a bit, but what were the funding sources of Soteria?
I probably should take this one unless you have some thoughts about this, but you can have comment. So Soteria, Alaska was primarily funded through through an effort to get the legislature to identify funding for Soteria, Alaska. And they identified approximately half to 2/3 of the funding. And then, of course, we knew we had to fill in the blanks, which meant we had to figure out some other sources. And then, so then we also, we had some funding through the assisted living home folks who were basically room and board funding, oddly, room and board funding. And then we filled in with about 20%, less than 20%, about really way less than 10% of Medicaid funding, meaning that we had to bill some services at about 10%. And then yes, so that's our funding. Yeah.
I would like to elaborate a little bit more on that question. So what was the funding, the budget, like rent, just roughly? I know you don't have the Excel sheet there, but
so the optimum budget, no, I know this, I sleep it, I think about it. Every year when the funding, I have like this thing in my brain when the year end is up, I think, do we have enough funding to get to the end of the year, even though I don't work there anymore, but I wake up in the middle of the night and say, do we have it? So I know exactly what it is. So the optimum funding to do like everything, all the bells and whistles would have been $700,000 to $750,000 a year. What we lived on was more like $600,000 a year. And every once in a while, we did a little less than that. But we also had a sister program that helped us with some stuff. So, I mean, we had services that we borrowed, I guess is what I'd say. So I would say, I don't know if that answered your question. Actually, I would say optimum is $750,000. I'm real clear on that. But also you must understand housing costs are very pricey here. So it could probably be done cheaper somewhere else. We paid $6,000 a month in rent. And so I think if you were in another place and time, you could do cheaper than that, but it was the perfect location, which we kind of felt was important. And we gave it away at one point and then we came back to it. So yeah.
And Susan, how many people could stay at any one time?
So we had enough rooms to have I think it was 8 people. But because if we went over 5 or 6, I forget the number now, you know, I'm kind of old. I forget the number, but if we went over the number, we had to have a sprinkler system, but we got funding for that, but we never implemented it. If we had a sprinkler system, we could have gone to 10, and that would have made it a whole lot easier to support itself, actually. But then, you know, then you have to add staff, and, you know, it's kind of, it's a trade-off, but also, so I would say the community size was often 5-ish. Guys, jump in here, because I'm telling you, I'm not remembering. You guys were there after me. What do you think? 5-ish?
Matt, I can hardly hear you. Spencer, I can't hear you.
Oh, I hadn't said anything, but I think Matt would know the most about this. I think it was 5 and maybe 7, maybe 8 at one point, but Matt is the foremost expert.
Yeah, is my volume stuff not working? Is my mic not working?
Now it is.
It's a little better now.
Yeah, it was always just 5 residents at a time.
Oh,
Is- But so from my understanding, Susan, you're saying if we had 6, we would have had to have the sprinklers installed?
We needed sprinklers to do more, but the sprinklers were $75,000 to do, and we actually had procured the money for it, but anyway, it didn't happen. I'm not even gonna go there, but but yes, that's why I couldn't remember if it was 5 or 6, but we had to limit it because of the sprinkler system thing.
hold on. I don't know if anybody else, it sounds
I
like
hear it
there's
too. There's
a
something.
dragon laying in wait, making growling noises.
It's from, sorry about that. My window apparently doesn't want to block out Connect Bay Road.
Sorry.
At least we know the source. At least it's not some mysterious.
Or a
poltergeist.
really loud pug.
The aliens have joined us.
Susan, just a little bit more clarification, or anyone else that knows. So your major funding revenue went to the house. So there was like food, staff, just the general household budget after that, what you would, and staff, that would be, you know, 24-hour staff. And then food, is that pretty much what the budget would be?
So the biggest cost, of course, is the staffing. The biggest cost is the staffing. So you have to figure out what your staffing is going to be. We had 10 staff at most times, and I'm not saying they were there all the time, you know, with shifts and everything, you know, everybody can't be there all the time. So we had 10 staff and house manager and some lead people, but basically staffing is the biggest cost. If you're going to open a house, staffing is the biggest cost. And we had volunteers, but you can't rely on volunteers to be the mainstay, and because, you know, they're not required to be there. So they come in and they help, and they're great. And sometimes they are the mainstay. That's the cool thing about it. But you can't require them to come, right? So staffing is the biggest cost. Rental or lease or ownership is the second biggest cost. And in our case, we probably paid more than we probably could have gone cheaper, but we probably wouldn't have been successful in a certain kind of weird way, even though I know we ended up closing, but it wasn't about that. And then food and stuff, like, that's minimal. And we belong to the food bank, so we get a lot of our food. I'm going to let Spencer and Matt speak to that. We went to the food bank. That was a great community activity. We went to the food bank. We had cooking community stuff going on around all of that, buying and cooking. So the biggest expense is staffing and housing, but mainly staffing. Mhm.
I would definitely say the food bank contributed a lot greatly. There was always food there and stuff to cook. So that helped out a lot, especially if you have a team to coordinate, getting together to go to the food bank and stuff. That helped them fill the freezer pretty quick. And so that gave people a lot of access and stuff. That'd be the biggest thing I could think of. Also, it was a good sized space for everything that was going on. And that actually helped alleviate a lot of tension because there was like the garage and then there was a whole separate kitchen, or I mean the kitchen and like dining room, and then there was like a living room. So there were several different areas people could be hanging out in. So people could, be in their own kind of space for a while and rely on that, in comparison to like most assisted living facilities I've been in, where they only have one living room and two couches. And everybody gets one TV to watch whoever's in charge picks. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of good to that. It was worth it to have a good sized space for people to flourish in.
Yeah. Also, I don't know how soon you budgeted for it, but you were a part of that. But the residents and like staff, we would have a budget each week. And within that budget, we would try to encourage residents there to, pick out a meal that they want to cook and have to go, get all of the ingredients and everything from the store, which was Safeways, which was, just like a mile away or something like that. So real easy walk for anyone. But that was definitely a time, where we worked on the community, pretty much preparing a meal, sharing it with everyone, having the little mini house meetings at the table, where people are kind of checking in and talking about stuff going on. But yeah, and then, for someone that was in crisis or, experiencing some level of psychosis, that's where some of the adventures would be, when they're the ones that, it's their turn to cook a meal, and, and providing them that opportunity, even if, they're not feeling too well or whatever, but monitoring them when, cutting stuff. That was one of the questions from, what we did last week or whenever exactly that was. But yeah, that's when the fun stuff would happen.
Excellent.
So
Thank
I
you.
remember when I was there, I had a grand adventure and went up over one of the summers towards the end of it being open. And what I remember was, it was so cool. It was a duplex, side-by-side duplex, that you must have had a wall taken down. And so there were actually two kitchens and, two living places and two garages, which were converted into, the music, art, smash things up room, and the other one, which had, like bicycles that people could use, and lawn equipment and all of that stuff. So that was a pretty amazing setup, I thought.
Yeah, hearing how much Susan, was paying for the house each month, that totally makes sense, because working there for 5 years that it was like a huge house, and it seems expensive, but yeah, it was a lot of space for a lot of different people with different perspectives of things in the world, different hobbies, creativity levels, that all kind of came together in one house and shared all that with each other. And yeah, I agree with you, Grace. It was a pretty cool setup for Soteria.
So I'm going to jump in here. So one of the things that I think about is that Soteria is a community in and of itself. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, I'm sorry, because my thing's going a little weird here. Community is an internal enclosed community, but it was really important to us to also be a part of the community. And what I learned is that every resident brought a part of the community into the house and out of the house.
Oh,
And I'm sorry, every employee brought a part of the community into the house and out of the house. And we had a thing where we never did anything without residents, like a residents, they might do stuff without us, but we'd chase them down and say, come on, we're here too. But basically, you know, the whole bike thing is really weird. Like there was a time, and this is how I know that Soteria houses look different depending upon who lives there and who works there. But at some point, somebody got involved in this like bike co-op where you would go in, and if you worked on a bike, you got a bike. And so people had bikes, and people worked on bikes, they got bikes. We did food bank, but you had to go to the food bank, you had to work in the food bank, all that kind of stuff. And but then that what you know, that and stuff you're talking about is like kind of true. Like somebody who might be having what most of the world would call a psychotic episode, they're being challenged, and we include them in it, and then what the heck happens? And we just keep going, right? We don't stop. We don't shut it off. We keep going as best we can. So to me, that's the heart of a Soteria approach. And you guys just explained it better than I ever could have.
Well, good. But I also want to say something about the bicycles. What made those really nice was, you know, part of the Soteria way was also not, you know, doing on to the people, the residents that are there. So, you know, if I was to join someone on a bike ride to go to the store or to the park or wherever, you know, was necessary to go, it put us on like an equal playing field, right? Like we're both riding. You know, I might be out of shape, then they might be able to talk about it, you know, and that exercise, and you know, talk about how that's really therapeutic in and of itself. But yeah, that's when I worked there, I tried to drive as minimally as possible. Just, you know, it was a great opportunity to get outside in summers of Alaska with the residents there, and yeah, let their case managers drive them, and you know, that kind of stuff.
Excellent. Thank you. Anything else to say about that one, or are you ready to move on to the next question? Great. Great. The next question was what was the policy on self-harm, like if someone tried to cut themselves or was banging their head or something like that?
You know, I think for me, as someone that was on the floor for, you know, 5 years, like I said, uh, you know, I don't think, like I've worked in some other assisted living facilities like down in Boise, Idaho, that, you know, would operate on a, oh my God, someone hit their head or, you know, anything, then you got to do an incident report and you got all these policies and procedures. Um, you know, as far as what I can recall, it was kind of on a case by case basis, but you know, I think we did have some incident reports. I think so, right, Susan? It's been a while. But you know, just ensuring safety. Obviously, we're not going to let someone go around, bash their head and, you know, hurt themselves and say that's okay. But you know, I can recall a time where someone at the house had harmed themselves and was comfortable enough to, you know, show it to a different staff, and just taking that resident to the hospital and getting it treated. But I can't recall, and hopefully someone else has some more information on this, but I can't recall like any repercussions or anything. But I think, you know, for that kind of situation, that person wouldn't, you know, we would monitor them more with a knife, or maybe not allow them to have access for a while. But I think the big thing was on, right, like if people are going to harm themselves like that, that they have the comfortability to go to someone that they trust and talk about it and show it. And so really just as long as that's in place, you know what I mean, then it could become a really therapeutic situation rather than just take away, you know, any access to anything and make them feel like a mental patient, which is what we didn't want any of them to feel. So
And I remember conversations when you say, you know, like maybe we'd restrict access to knives, but there's a way to do that. That's a very top-down way, and and that didn't feel like what would happen in the house. It would felt like it was more like there'd be a discussion, like, hey, you know, how would it be if we got these out of the way so that you don't, it's not easy for you to do this, and instead maybe you'll come talk to us more, or however the conversation would be, and it would be more of a, like, let's figure this out together. And I imagine if the person's like, hell no, I want access to those to do that again, then you would get to say, like, honestly, how that feels for you, and you know what you need, you know what I mean? Like there's a level of authenticity and a level of figuring it out together. And
exactly, and that's, you know, you're kind of putting your whole team into a bunch of unknowns when you're there at Soteria. But you know, that's the ideal approach, right? Like in reality, there would be some residents that I would be working with that if I'm in control of the keys to the, you know, where we keep the knives or whatever, it's like I'm not comfortable even like approaching this person in their current present state and explaining my whole feelings about why I don't trust them with a knife when maybe, you know, they have some trauma with that or history with that, you know, and that's just protecting myself. But absolutely, if you know, if even that person came down to a more grounded state, I believe that would be a conversation that would ensue, you know, even just on a friend to friend thing, you know, telling that person that, oh man, when you first moved in, honestly, I was kind of scared of you, you know, and I did this and that because I was scared. But over time, like I realized I didn't need to be scared with you, and you know, that you're a great person to connect to and that kind of stuff. So that's, yeah, just a point that I think is important, that, yeah, you try to have it open to the individual, so we're not restricting their freedom, but definitely not placing the whole community or myself. If I'm just at work, I'm going to do what I think is safe. And that just comes with, I think, some time and figuring people out and who they are individually and their habits.
Great. Anything to add to that?
Spencer,
oh, hello, friend.
got anything on that one?
I don't.
Spencer, I know you've been in challenging situations there.
Oh yeah. I mean, most of it was just trying to de-escalate with folks, you know, and like acknowledge their feelings and the fact that they're sharing with us, you know, if they're, you know, having a bad day or if they're, you know, thinking about self-harming. Like it's better that we're included in that conversation than we're, you know, changing the dynamic and, you know, getting all parental about it. I think, you know, it's important to acknowledge that people are experiencing that stuff and to have more of a community discussion involving it and how to successfully, you know, move away from that or find alternatives. I think mostly what I think about or what comes to mind is a lot of people just running off in the middle of the night when either it's 30 degrees out or, you know, just inappropriate times into the neighborhood, and kind of us being, you know, tasked with, well, we got to go with this person because we can't just let them go out screaming in the street, you know. And I think overall, though, it's just mostly just going through it with people and working with them, and whatever happens, but, you know, not with ideally, you know, that we're not totally, or that we're able to move away from self-harm and stuff is the best resolution I could think of. If I missed any marks, please tell me. But
You're great. So I would say there was no policy about self-harm or any of that stuff. So it's a good question. And that's what happens in most places, that you have a policy and then you have to follow it. So what happens in a soteria approach is that you don't have a policy, but you have to trust. This is why having the right people who are working there and volunteers who know, who can be with it, but also understand they're going to stay safe and they're going to be safe with the other residents and blah, blah, blah. But so that's the point. No policy. Every situation is different. You
Wow.
hear the person and try and figure it out. So if you're in a state hospital, somebody gets kind of shitty, bad word for recording, gets in a way that is not tolerable or appreciated by most of the people, you make a policy like, we're not going to tolerate that. But that's not what happens in a soteria approach. It's kind of like you say, okay, what's going on? What can we do? We also know that there are a lot of people who do self-harm related to trauma and hurt and, you know, that kind of thing. And so you just kind of go, I'm not saying you let somebody really hurt themselves, but you kind of pay attention to it and then offer it. What I can't even say it better than Matt and Spencer just said it, but that's why we had no policy, which some people I think thought was irresponsible, but I think it's the best way to be, and we had a lot of success with that. And
I like what you just said on how some people would view that as irresponsible, because, you know, Soteria was where I started working there when I was living out of my car, unregistered, uninsured, and in Anchorage, Alaska, and doing some bad stuff that I shouldn't have been doing, but, you know, was really brought into the community. And you know, yeah, it helped me. And that's how I learned how, you know, to work in peer support, or, you know, if I'm working in other group homes, like I previously mentioned. But it's different to go to that life where they have the policies and procedures. And when, you know, like one home that I worked at in Boise, Idaho, make a really great connection with a peer there. And, you know, you're cooking dinner together and they're just like, come on, man, like, can I just borrow the knife so I can cut this potato? You know, like, I'm actually feeling safe with them and stuff, and having to tell them like, no, you know, I'm staff, I get to cut stuff and you don't, you know, and that feels weird. So I'm always thankful that Soteria, you know, I was taken in at such a younger age, that I don't come at that kind of stuff from the opposite approach, because that's what I think is dehumaning, you know, humanizing. But yeah.
I always had a question from my time there. The house was it was a couple blocks from railroad tracks. And when I got there, there was somebody who would say, it's too hard. I'm ending it, and I'm going to go down to the railroad tracks right now and wait for a train, and would take off. And this was somebody who was like a strong runner, and it would be like, Grace, be with them, go be with them, you know. And I'd feel like, hey, can we talk about it? And they're like, I don't want to talk about it, go away. And I'm like, I can't go away, I have to be with you. And it was, and then they'd get really angry, like, go away, I'm trying to do something here and I don't want you around. And it was just, and it happened several times, and I never found a better way. I felt really caught, you know, like I really wanted to honor them. They're saying, I don't want you around.
Yeah.
And yet it just felt like, no, like you just said you were gonna go on the train. It was just a very double bind situation. And I'm wondering how y'all would have done it better. I was such a newbie, you know, and out of shape.
Yeah. Well, I think, I wish my other brother was here, Taylor, because he worked there for a while, and he always talks to this day, several years later, about his experience with that same train, and probably that same person you're talking about. But I won't touch on that. But really, what it comes to is that level of rapport with the resident, and it's just not something. I don't even think when you're like thinking about a Soteria perspective or that kind of stuff, you can try to emulate it, you can try to teach it, but it comes from a different place. And, I think that for some people that were visiting there, they were trying to get the Soteria experience all in one quick trip or something, you know what I mean? And in reality, it's like, with me having worked there for so long, it's like it took a long time to not only learn the Soteria community, the rules, how everything works, but to really feel enmeshed with that community and understand it and have that experience and time, behind me to really build that rapport with residents there. And, and that it's a totally different situation if someone runs down to the railroad tracks and they just got, released to our care from the hospital and no one knows them, and it's like, oh, who knows? But, it was definitely for those people that you had that close rapport with and you just so happened to be on shift that day, it'd be a totally different experience. And that's really, another thing that really is important to me to recognize is that it's truly that connection that you gain with the residents, and that bond, and defeating the idea of the hierarchy, me versus you, staff versus resident, and truly caring about that person in that moment. Just a difficult thing to emulate in a short amount of time of knowing someone.
I have a question on
I'm
that.
sorry, it looks like Spencer was gonna add to that.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no?
No, Spencer, and then I'm going next.
Okay.
I don't have a better response at this time, but Susan should.
I'm sure you do, Spencer. I'm thinking you've been to the railroad tracks. No?
I suppose. I don't know if I was to the railroad tracks, but I've been through a lot of other situations for sure. I think any of those circumstances, we're just trying to help and listen to the person, right? I don't know. I chased around a lot of people, don't get me wrong. And mostly at, 2:00 in the morning and weird hours, you don't want to do anything like that, at least. But I mean, mostly, people chill out and stuff. People get, I'm blanking on my words here.
You're doing
But-
good. Keep going. You're
But
doing
people chill, calm down, and most people understand that, we can't really just leave them there. They're vulnerable adults, they're people experiencing difficult places and stuff. And so usually they kind of, once they chill out, or once they get over the initial anger and stuff, then they usually walk back or come back and, be okay or adjust to a different situation. That's all. Yeah. Susan.
Okay. Railroad tracks. So I'm friends with the railroad tracks. I walk the railroad tracks. I myself almost got arrested 2 years ago because I hopped over the fence and walked the railroad tracks because it's the most beautiful view in Anchorage, and my dog loved it. And there's a beach on the other side of the railroad tracks, and I've been doing it for years. And maybe a year ago, they're fenced off, but I had a little way I used to go in, and then some guy who bought up a piece of property and was really rich and had the Gordian people come, and he saw me on the railroad tracks with my dog and called the little guardian, the security people. And they were like almost going to arrest me, which I thought was hilarious. And I thought, are you kidding me? I've been walking the railroad tracks for years. So I'm friends with the railroad tracks personally. That being said, now you're going to think I'm weird, and you don't have to edit this. I'm going to be honest about it.
I thought it was badass, Susan. Good job.
But
Yeah.
But my story about the railroad tracks is somebody who, I guess I'm not supposed to say her name, but her name starts with an S, and you guys know her. And she went out on a New Year's Eve, and I don't know if you guys remember Terry Smith, who's passed since. And I gave all the young people, I'm pretty sure that was you guys, the night off on New Year's Eve, because I figured you wanted to have a party or something. And I was old. I don't kind of do that anymore. So Terry and I think we had somebody else, I'm not sure. We had somebody else on call. And one of our residents, most of the residents went to their families, but one of our residents was there, and she went off on a party. And so she called us up, and because she got herself into a bad situation. She was doing, I'm not sure what she was doing. I don't care. It doesn't matter. But she got herself into a bad situation, but she knew to call us. And that's the beauty of Soteria House. She called us. Like she could have got herself raped, arrested. I mean, killed. I don't know. Bad stuff could have happened, but she called us and said, I need somebody to pick me up. And there was Terry. It was a 12-stepper and me working. So we were sober, and we went to go get her. And then when we got to where she wasn't there anymore. And then she was on the railroad tracks, and then but she kept calling us, right? So we kept tracking her. We couldn't totally find her. Finally, we found her at a house party, and the cops were already there because it was a bad house party, which she knew. And I consider this one of my finest New Year's Eves of my life. So we're like, okay, get in the car with us if you want to. And she's like, oh, please. And then the cop said, there's like a couple other people who need a ride home. Can you take them? So somehow I became the sober police, which is hilarious to me, but then we were. And we put him in the car, and we drove people home, and we took our little girl. I call her my little girl because she was like my little girl, but I know that's like stupid, but it was. When you live in Soteria, that's the kind of relationships you have. And what I thought was great is that she trusted us so much that she actually called us. And even though she moved around a little bit, because at one point she was on the railroad tracks, and then and then she just kind of like trusted us. And that's like the beauty of a Soteria House. I can't explain it any better than that. And that's my relationship to railroad tracks, except for the time a year and a half ago when I almost got busted for walking on the railroad tracks. But I would say this, it's not about a policy or control. It's about being with and understanding, contextual thinking, and people who get diagnosed with whatever, schizophrenia, blah, 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 they still get to have a life, and they get to have a New Year's Eve. And thank God they have somebody they can call and say, I'm in trouble. Can you help me? And I have no more to say about that. Sorry. Railroad tracks. I really do have a lot to say about railroad tracks because I have a strong connection to them. I've always tracks. But I will say this. That's all I have to say.
Excellent.
Right.
Thanks. Cindy?
I'd like to, and you can pass on that because it might be looking for too much detail, but that piece about new folks that you haven't developed a relationship with, and if they are a runner and they want to run alone, when I say runner, I'm talking about the folks that just like take off, not the jogging people. You, because they're new and you haven't developed that relationship and they say stay away, you still follow, you still try to keep them in sight and kind of build that relationship on the run, so to speak?
You know, not always, right? Like, I think that never in my training of working there was I told, like, no, Matt, no one cares about your safety. Like, you know, you just go on, get out there and you follow that person, right? We would do everything within our means to be able to, but, you know, it's difficult for me right now to think of like specific circumstances where, you know, a situation where that I can describe, but I feel like if someone, you know, if it was unsafe or it put staff in danger, that we would, you know, try to call the police or on call, definitely like on call Susan, you know, and try to figure it out as time goes on that we're with that person, you know, um, but I think in reality, I mean, if you look at it, this is someone that is coming in to live, you know, in our community and under our care. So of course there was, you know, some level of wanting to make sure that someone's safe and, you know, that we're not letting someone get hurt, but you could only do what you could do within your means. And sometimes that meant, you know, having to ask for more help. But that's my answer on that.
So I think Spencer actually walked with some people. Am I wrong on that, Spencer?
Oh, you're frozen and you're muted. There we go.
Spencer was, I don't know, he's muted. Spencer, I know you've walked with some people and you've made moves.
I
and-
have an internet connection issue. Give me just a second.
Sure. I'll just add this while Spencer's getting his internet back. It's not really running, it's more like walking. And if they don't want you there, but you want to make sure they're safe, you walk behind them. Sometimes you walk like a block or two away. That's the way I always did it. And I've done it more than once, even though I didn't do it like these guys did it, because seriously, I was kind of the administrator, so I wasn't like there all the time. But I was the on-call and I have done it. So I'm gonna let Spencer jump in if he's back.
Yeah, we used to walk with these folks. That was just a regular part of our day, I'd say. And kind of just an expectation. You know, people want to walk and get out their energy, or just they want to walk around the community and stuff. I think it's just a big part of working there, really. You just kind of go there anticipating walking, you know, as being a part of the evening, which isn't, you know, not a bad way to live to begin with. And especially, mostly I think it was helping build up the expectation of independence for folks so that they were able to walk, you know, to the bus stop successfully, and so they could walk to a job successfully. Because ultimately we weren't like in a position to just give them enough transportation to everywhere, or wanted to empower them to be able to step away from just, you know, thinking that someone else is going to be able to provide those types of services or needs so that help them, you know, find gainful employment and succeed, or be able to succeed. Let me know if I'm missing any marks I should hit.
So this comes under the heading of being with. The person could be what a lot of the world says is crazy, but they're still gonna walk. They're gonna go somewhere. They're gonna go to the store. They're gonna go to school. They're gonna do whatever. And you walk with them. And if they say, don't walk with me, I'm offended, and you think they're not safe, you walk behind them. That's the way we did it at our Soteria. I'm not saying that's the way they did it in the original Soteria, but that's how we did it. And I know that both Spencer and Matt and countless people who volunteered and worked there. And honestly, the residents would walk with each other. Like you have to understand, it becomes a community. It's not just the employees, the community. I can tell you a story about this that just brings tears to my eyes about how the community came together for somebody. And so it's not all about the paid employees. They just go.
I can take one out. I turned off the video for a second. Okay. Thank you.
So I'm going to tell a weird story right now, if I can. So we had somebody who got arrested for assault. So she got aggressive and she got arrested for assault. And it was a weekend. It was a weird thing. So anyway, so she got arraigned oddly on like a Saturday. I think it was a Saturday. And the residents knew she was gonna like probably get like locked up or something. So the residents went to the court with her.
Oh.
I wasn't there. I never would have allowed this. This is why administrators should not be involved. I would never have allowed this. But the residents went and they said to the judge, please release her to us. And oddly, the judge did. And she came back to Soteria because she could have spent the night in jail. And they just kind of went over there and said, please release her to us. We will make sure that she doesn't do whatever she did. I don't even know what she did, but whatever she did, it wasn't good, right? She had a moment. So, but she didn't do major harm. It was kind of like minimal harm. Anyway.
Oh,
So
wow, that's beautiful.
that's the community thing that happened.
Excellent, excellent.
I want to
And
just,
I think Spencer's back. Did you have more to say, Spencer?
Oh, no, not. I'm sorry. I don't have more to say. I don't know. I haven't thought about this in a while. So I think I appreciate it. But
I want to just, something that's been touched on that I keep hearing. I keep hearing people say, you can't teach people the being with, you know, but then I also hear people say, you know, it's like you have to build rapport and you have to, what I felt is like, if somebody, it's a paradigm shift, you know, it's like it's a really big paradigm shift, especially if somebody comes from the medical model top down and is disgruntled with it. It's still, you know, it's still in there and you have to kind of unlearn that. Or if you don't, if you just come from a place of like, you know, you feel largely with people, there's still a certain amount of skillfulness that you learn. And, you know, I felt I did being with better after my 2 months there than I did when I first got there. And I imagine if I had the opportunity to be there for 2 years, I would have done it way better. And so I think it's this combination, like when I think about people watching this who are trying to create Soteria houses, there's like, you're looking for somebody, like you're trying to get a sense of, do they just get it about empathy versus, you know, paternalism and, you know, all that, or do they get it about really believing that people's experiences are real and meaningful, you know? And then you could build up skill. And a lot of the ways is watching how other people do it in the house. So, you know, and listening to the conversations they have. And sometimes, you know, having somebody like pull you aside, another staff person pull you aside and say, hey, you know, what do you think about talking to them this way instead of that way? And it's like, oh, that would be great. Thanks, you know? So I think there's like a combination, like there are some people who are just really authoritarian and you maybe don't want to hire them, but there's also a certain level of coaching. I think that gets to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, really. And I hear what you're saying. And even I think I struggle to relate with that statement, I guess, just because like I had mentioned before, I was kind of born into the like Soteria way 2 years after it was already a community. That's where I learned my, how I navigate peer support and stuff. And then I did the opposite where I took that into already established medical model places, and it was just, appalling. So, but I can imagine the reverse of that being difficult, like you're saying. And definitely where I can relate is you're totally right that when I started working there, even though I say I was born into it or whatever, there were people that had worked there for a long time, and I was able to observe how they would interact, with specific residents or by themselves, how someone would carry themselves, you know what I mean? Like, so I think you do have a good point there. There is some things that you can kind of show people and teach people, but yeah, if it's like a personality trait that just doesn't jive, it's difficult. Like you're saying, arrogance, it's difficult to kind of train someone to not be so arrogant. You got to kind of screen that out when you're interviewing them. But yeah, good point.
That's actually a really good segue into the next question, which was, do you have any advice or ideas for psychology students who are interested in more compassionate approaches?
I'll just say something real quick because it's on my mind. And get out of the books. Go talk to someone that's living the life. Go sit down with someone on the streets that looks like they need, a second. And sure, see what they say, but treat them like a human. Maybe find what things they say match your education and what you're learning in school. But that's something that in my experience that I've kind of butted heads with people that come at it with, oh yeah, I got my master's in psychology and they're showing this and that and traits of this, and it's like, well, whatever. Well, what about just that human connection? You're missing that piece. And that's what I would say. Go sit down with someone that is actually walking that road and listen to their stories and try to put yourself in their shoes if you can.
I actually would encourage people before doing that, even to listen to people, like a lot of people with, when we say lived experience of having big emotional experiences, what would be called mental health crises, or people who have survived the mental health system. So it's called the CSX movement, the Consumer Survivor Ex-Patient movement, or peers, people who dip in and out of the mental health system or needing support at times, or have recovered from that and are living free of that. A lot of people have recorded their stories or written their stories, or there are films of their stories. It's like when you're trying to, like, if you're like me, I'm a white-skinned person trying to learn about racism and how to be anti-racist. Do not go up to people of color and start saying, can you teach me about racism? Like there's a lot that, like, buy books, support people who've written, support, pay to watch movies and support the people who put their stories out there, and listen, and learn that way before you inflict yourself on people. And that was really helpful. I had a big experience. Well, I grew up having experiences that would have been called major depression as a kid, and thank goodness wasn't caught in the system at that point. I could only imagine. And then, and then things got way better for me, coincidentally, maybe, when I moved out of my parents' house. And then when I was 30, I had a big, what I now call a cracking open experience that maybe would have been called psychosis. but again, I was really lucky and had a lot of support and didn't get caught in the system and wasn't medicated. And then because of that, I feel like I got to walk through it. And then another 10 years later, when I went to social work school, I kind of had forgotten because I had digested it and processed it and integrated it. And I'm sitting in a class on the DSM, which is how to diagnose people. And I'm like, oh, this feels toxic. I need the antidote. And I'm old, but I was able to like plunk around on the internet and find my way to a group called Mind Freedom International, which is made up of people with all lived experiences, and started reading their stories and listening to their stories. And I was like, I feel like that was the best part of my education. I learned the most, and I continue to learn the most by listening to people with lived experience and what helps them and what doesn't help them, and and thinking about my own experience. Then I was like, oh yeah, I had this experience, and look, I didn't need to take medication for the rest of my life like a diabetic needs insulin. Like I just needed the support and to make the meaning of it and walk through it. So listen to people and then talk to people in real life.
I think you're always looking for a compassionate humanist in this kind of field, and someone who can understand, the socioeconomic reasons that people end up in their situations and the difficulties that they're experiencing and such, and hopefully someone that can empathize with all that. But I think, you can vet that from a lot of different people. I don't know. I feel like I've made a lot of strides in my other field, just being, supportive of the fact that we need to be compassionate and treat the individuals that we serve with respect and dignity as people who are going to recover and get better from whatever circumstances they're facing, and someday have the memory of what they experienced with us. And so it's important to always be trying to provide the best services that you can, to the individuals that we help, or, if that means being there in this circumstance and being available to the people that we want to help and we want to serve. And so it's a lot of different challenges, but I think a lot with the right kind of coaching and mentoring, it's possible for most individuals to at least adapt, and learn. And I want to believe in wholeheartedly what, at some point, something happens in your life that convinces you that this kind of stuff is possible, or, that recovery from mental health is possible. And hopefully, most circumstances, that's hearing the story of another peer or person with lived experience who has recovered from their own mental health circumstances, because those are what empower people to understand. They humanize the stories out of the context of the DSM, and they kind of eliminate all that to have a better, support for us, or support for people who are experiencing mental health issues and concerns and having those challenges. Because ultimately, it always turns back for people in their minds on what is affecting them, and what mental health concerns do they have in their own lives. And so we want to provide, support and comfort with that. And the fact that we could all, have one terrible evening and be in some sort of mental health condition or experiencing our mental health challenge. I don't know if we call that a condition. I was at a loss for words temporarily, but yeah, that's all I could say. Yeah. So. Well, thank you.
Excellent. Anything to add to that, Susan?
I don't think I have more to say other than I am so grateful that Matt and Spencer came, because they are eloquent on this subject.
Yes.
And I hope that we were able to convey
Mhm.
the being with. We didn't even talk about contextual thinking, so if you ever want to do something on that, I'm glad to do it. But I think I could never say more than they have ever said, and I oh my God, you guys are fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Excellent. We have 2 more questions if you have time, and I think they'll
Sure.
be fairly quick questions. This one, Cindy's actually probably the best person to answer this one was, does Moms, which is the organization that Cindy founded, has Moms referred people to the Soteria House? And Cindy can explain a little bit more about Moms.
I know of no referrals from Moms to the Alaska Soteria House, but I have talked with Cindy. But it's been a long time. As I said, it was good to talk with you again. So no, not that I know of, not that I'm aware of.
Cindy, you're muted. And why don't you say what Moms is?
So it stands for the movement of mothers standing up together. And it originated as I started to recognize and acknowledge the abuse of the mental health institutions, which originally I thought were meant to help as a hospital. But as we stood up, we got shut up, shut down, and shut out. And so started networking with mothers across the country to kind of amplify our voice. We were able to get some folks out of the hospital. We did some protests, trying to reform the system, which I now know is not reformable. But as far as referring to Soteria, no, because at the time when I started this, there were no Soterias. This was back after reading Bob's book in 2010 and 2011. And so we went looking for property. We read the book, I read the book, and
Why don't you say which book and who Bob is?
Anatomy of an Epidemic. And he talked about Soteria and open dialogue. And so I got folks together and we would go look at houses and land and property and have big dreams, but none of us had any money or any real organization to write a grant with. I'm a big believer in manifesting. So I thought if we, would go out and say, this is it, somehow the money would happen or the house would be given to us or something. And so we did that until it didn't happen, so never referred anyone, but we always held out that someday, somewhere, somehow, there would be this incredible sanctuary for healing and empowerment. And the Moms model was creating communities where hearts heal and grow strong. But before if you have time, there's something that's just developed in the last 2 days that I wanted to ask you folks about. And Rachel, I think my last question, I think I have a question on there. I don't know if it's the last one, about how many folks would be, the ideal, the number in a house. I know about 2 or 3 or 4, what are your thoughts about maybe what's too small and at what point might it become too big?
I'm not hearing the Ladners. I'll jump in.
I'm hearing them think. I'm like,
All right, I'll let them speak first if they're ready. Do you want to think some more?
I mean, you go for it, Spencer.
Wait, I was gonna say, I think really a lot of it relies on independent service and treatment or help, not service or treatment, but independent help for every individual. So I think it seemed like it was always pretty decently able to fluctuate from 1 person to 5. But I think it functioned pretty well with, between 4 or 5 people. I could see it always fiscally seemed like if we had 8 people, we could manage really excellently or be more sustaining. And I'll leave that to someone else to speak to.
Yeah, I feel like when I was working there, you know, kind of like what Spencer was saying, there'd be times where there'd be two people or 3 people, and I'd have a great understanding of like, oh yeah, no, we need more people or less people. But yeah, it's a great question. I'd really have to think about that. I'm not 100% positive on that, so I'll pass it off to Susan.
I'm not 100%. I'm not 100% sure, but I think with appropriate staffing, because here's the thing that what happens with a community is that there's people who are new to it and they have greater needs, and then there's people who are graduating and then they help. So I would say oddly 8.
It's a max or the ideal size?
Ideal 8. But then you have zoning laws and all that kind of stuff. So that's how we ended up with 5, or I guess it was 5. You guys were telling me it was 5. I couldn't remember. I knew it was 5 or 6. So there's so many things that impact on this. But what I think is, and also if you go to the original Soteria, they said 8 to 10, and that included staff. So I'd say 7 to 8. But everybody doesn't come in at the same time. So you've got people who have been there for a while, who are getting ready to leave, but they give back, because that's what people do. They give back. People in recovery give back. And then new people, they kind of come in and they just need a surround them, you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
it's kind of like that. I stand by 8, but I have no research, honestly, to back that up. But that's what I'd go with. But I knew we could do it with 5. We did it with, well, we couldn't do 6. I always thought 6 might have been better than 5, just because of the reason I just said. So the residents become the helpers, and that's like healing for everybody. I don't even know how else to say that. So that's it. I got nothing else to say on that topic. I have no research behind it.
It's a gut feeling.
My gut.
Great.
But I stand by it. Every
I
while I think I got a good gut feeling. I think that's one's right. I really say, I cook a lot and only 50% of my made up recipes are good. So, but I stand by the 8.
And Cindy, didn't you
okay, thank you.
recently?
Yeah. I actually talked to Voice today because of something that has just finally looks like it might be manifesting.
And you
so I
mean
was
Boyce
asking him-
Hendricks from the original Soteria house?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's for the audience, right? It was interesting. His on the lower end, he was suggesting that you definitely need, because I was saying, what about 2 or 3 folks, in a house? And he was saying that the key to Soteria, as you have said, is community and relationship. And when you have just 2 or 3 folks, it's not as conducive, I guess, to building the kind of community that will sustain what you're trying to create, with everybody kind of growing and becoming a part of helping others. And some of this I'm adding to what he said, but for sure he had said that 2 or 3 was not the ideal piece. He said they did limited at 6. They had the limited at 6 because of the zoning, and I think this maybe the sprinklers, or that might have been you with the sprinklers. There was something around the community requirements where 6 was the max, and he
and I had similar challenges with the sprinklers. God damn it! The sprinklers are determining our mental health programming. What the heck? Sorry, maybe you might want to edit that out, but that's crazy, right?
We're all
I
adults.
think it needs to be heard.
Yes. who
I
would have
think it
thought?
needs to be heard.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Great. And
And then he did say, but when you get up higher, and I'm thinking like 9, 10, I think he even said the word, like some of the facilities, quote, that are supposed to be residential. When it gets up to those numbers, it gets much harder to do. He doesn't recommend the big numbers, and also something about when you get into those higher numbers, then there becomes like factions, like this group and a certain staff and that group and certain staff. And so then you start getting that kind of issues that you have to then try and work through too. So he
But
was,
also, if you get bigger, Cindy, you become an institution. This is a home-like environment. That's why we're talking about, I think 5 to 8 fluctuate, but you get bigger than that. I grew up with a family of 7 kids, 2 parents, 7, 8, 9. Okay. We had a home-like environment. You get bigger than that, and then you're an institution. That's, which is what we're trying not to do.
yes, yeah. Amen.
Right. Exactly. And last question is, do you know if there is any kind of reparation fund for psychiatric survivors?
Ooh. No, but there should be. That's a great idea.
I can speak to that in a kind of off-center way, which is it's really pretty sad. But in the state of Washington, the state got sued by the Disability Rights Washington, and then the feds joined the case. It was called True Blood versus Washington. True Blood was just then happened to be the name of one of the disability rights lawyers, and they chose that. But the long story short is because people who got picked off the street for acting strange or creating some kind of a quote nuisance or whatever, and were taken into jail. And then there was a question of their ability to aid in their defense, which then they would say they need a competency evaluation. Because if you were competent, you could aid in your defense and they could go ahead with the trial. But if you weren't, then you needed to have a valuation to ascertain that you really weren't. So somebody come in and ask you some questions, and then they would determine that you were or were not. But in the state of Washington, because they had a shortage of competency evaluators, or oftentimes you were supposed to be sent to the hospital to get that evaluation, people would sit in jail, and usually because they were not functioning as the jail would like them, probably because they had been declared incompetent, or they would end up in isolation. They couldn't go to trial. They couldn't be released. He didn't have the bail money. So they would sit in isolation, and the level of self-mutilation and suicide and deeper mental challenges grew. So finally, the feds came in and said, fix it. They didn't. So they started charging the state of Washington $500 a day for each person that didn't get evaluated within 2 weeks. And then $1,000 a day for each person in the state of Washington that didn't get sent to a psychiatric competency restoration bed if they had been declared incompetent within 2 weeks after that. So within, and it's either 2 or 3 years, but I'm pretty sure it's 2 years. Guess how much the state of Washington owed off of the blood, sweat, tears, scarred bodies, all that happened in those isolation cells and whatever. Any idea? $80 million.
Wow. Unbelievable.
And then guess how much the individuals whose confined, locked up, broken souled bodies earned that money. Guess how much they got directly when they were ever released to start their own life. Guess how much they got? Zero. There
What
is, if you, yeah, zero directly, like you earned it because you were locked up, you didn't have your due process, you were isolated, you experienced all of that despair, but you don't get the money. It went to the police to learn how to maybe make different choices instead of funneling people in. It went to diversionary services. It went to housing for some. You had to be on a certain registry of a high utilizer to make the list to be able to access special funds for housing. It went to smaller hospitals, more competency restoration. But anything new, innovative, Soteria, open dialogue? No, they just wanted more enhanced services. So we got more of the same enhanced. It's like,
Cindy,
so
it's,
that's the only thing I know of where there was some kind of quote seeming reparation, but it was twisted.
but like with your son, when he comes out and he's been in the hospital and they've said, the courts have said he's ready to be released, and then the hospital doesn't release him because they can't find housing. So he's earning the True Blood money while he sits, and then when he gets, and I'm saying that with a question, and then when he gets out, there is some money from True Blood. Can you explain about that?
Well, first of all, you don't earn money sitting in the hospital. Once you've actually gotten to the hospital, then it's no longer like a due process. You finally got there. So the fact that he can't get discharged now because they want an adult family home and no adult family home will accept him because he's been criminalized, at least in the past, it took them a year after his discharge to actually release him because they want to make sure he's in the right type of housing. But he did make the list of high utilizers, people who've been declared incompetent in the last 2 years and had a series of homelessness. He did make that list. And so he will have access to $7,500 through the organization that got the contract, and they will help him find permanent housing, and they can pay for his deposit and until the $7,500 runs out, but it never goes directly to him or those who are directly assisting him. It always still stays in the system, although it is not tied to medication treatment. The release may be tied to medication treatment, but the funding, so it still is not directly to the person to make the choices on how to best recover, or those even assisted, supported decision-making doesn't happen that way. I can't get the money and say, hey, let me do a Soteria house, go put the money down for $7,500, whatever. So that's the only thing I've ever heard of folks getting money kind of paid back, reparations, as they said. I think in the past they used to do have some self-directed stuff. They used to do that where the money would follow the person and the person got to decide whether they needed yoga or restraints. Excuse me, I'm being sarcastic.
The follow the person never really. I want to tell you, I love your advocacy. I can't believe that you just keep standing up every day. And um, yeah, that's all I'll say. So I'm not going to speak for my colleagues here today, but if I can help you in any way, I'm ready to do that. But yeah, it's dismal, but it's not hopeless, really. And stuff happens. So it's like we can't. Every individual situation is like not really helped, but can we move the marker a little bit? You know what I mean? And so that's what I've been looking at a lot. And you know, you're right. Your real experience is right. That's the way it is. This is why we're here today. And I don't know what else to say about that. And I really haven't known you well, but I've known you for a long time.
Yeah, we have.
I know, and you keep
At
standing.
that conference, Bob was there. It's a conference
know.
somewhere.
And I think it was in New York. I'm not sure, but anyway, over
Yeah.
the well, more than that. I've seen you more than once. So, so you keep standing up. I don't even know what to say about that. Like, you just keep doing it, and that's all we can do. So we got to move the barometer a little bit, but we're never gonna. I don't even know how to make the change other than I've been committing most of my work to how to figure out how to change the kind of culture that thinks about all this stuff. So, but I can't think of, I really, you know, you just keep doing it. Thank you. I have no answer for your question, really. Jim Gottstein probably has more of an answer to your question than me, but even he would be
Jim and I have.
dismal,
contact.
I think. You know, he's down the street. I could go run and get him, but I'm pretty sure he'd be dismal about it. But not hopeless. We're not hopeless. That's why we keep doing it. So
Yeah, I second
I
that.
hope
Can you briefly
doing
explain who Jim Godstein is for anyone who might not be familiar with his work? Can you just like briefly explain who he is and his role to Soteria, Alaska?
So Jim Gottstein is a guy in Alaska who himself was hospitalized at oh God, he had a degree from Harvard, Yale. I can't even remember.
Harvard.
A law degree.
Know this. He's my friend. I'm telling you, he lives like 3 doors down from me. So, but he made it his life's work to fight forced bad treatment. We don't even want to call it treatment, forced stuff. And he's oh my God, what can I say about Jim? Buy his new book, Zyprexa Papers,
Yes.
in hardback, and you will know. You know, he's a part of Mind Freedom. He was the mover for Soteria Choices, which was a peer-run organization, the Web, which was a peer-run drop-in center, and Psych Rights, which has been, you know, fights for the rights of people who are being not having rights, and he's been helping with the Shield for Mind Freedom International. And I don't know, I didn't do it. I could read his intro, but I didn't have it out handy. He's a great guy.
That gets it.
Okay, he's a guy. He's our guy. He helped us.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be here doing Soteria stuff without Jim Gottstein. So that's all I'll say. And neither would Matt or Spencer, because there wouldn't have been a Soteria without Jim.
Yep. Thanks, Jim.
He's a saint.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
I know him, I won't say that, but oh, edit that. Okay.
Who is it? No one, none of us are. Thank you so much, everyone, for your work and your
Rachel,
advocacy. Yes.
Very quickly, because if that part about the True Blood gets on there, I want to give them a little bit more due credit. I was very angry because I feel like the voice of those most impacted should have had the greatest decision making on how that 88 million got spent. But I will say that something that is very good, besides the fact that there is $7,500 for a few, is that they did hire peers that are supposed to kind of work with people in the hospital, and as they integrate out, and will be with the person. And there was other support staff that the powers to be have determined might be more helpful. So there is more good than I intimated. It's not nearly enough. Clearly, the voices the most impacted were not at the center of the decision-making table, but there is more diversionary and other things. So I just want to give that kind of due credit rather than bashing them completely.
That's helpful to know. Yes, but I know you've talked about the True Blood before, but yeah, that's really helpful to know. And yeah, like Susan said, thank you for your tireless advocacy. I'm glad at least some positive things came out of that. So, yeah.
Susan, I will talk with you later. I've got something that's like pretty amazing that's just unfolded maybe in the last 2 or 3 days. I think it's amazing. We'll see.
I hope so, but I have to go.
Yep.
Because
Okay.
my dog and I have not eaten.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
We're all about food here.
Yes, I know.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. This was great. Yes,
Have a
and
great night.
we'll post this on YouTube very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank
All
you.
righty. Enjoy your dinner.
Yes.
You
Yes.
and Finch.
Take care. Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you.